It's reality dating season, and I hate how much that I love the messiness of like watching reality stars trying to find love. For the longest time, I used to be like, I'm an academic. I need to be above this to always just be enjoying my scholarly pursuits. But now, after like the trauma of getting a PhD through COVID and realizing that life is short, I now realize that like we contain multitudes and there's nothing shameful about enjoying reality TV, and you can be intelligent, hardworking, talented, and studious, and also love crap TV. And apparently there are a ton of articles about intelligent people loving reality TV. So vindicated. What has never been in my bingo cards is a Regency era reality dating show full of questionable Regency dresses, a sprawling estate, and socks that apparently refuse to stay on men's thighs, thus breaking the fantasy of breeches and tall boots. Welcome back to Regency Rumors. I'm Kayla, and here on my channel, I make videos about period dramas, history, and historical fiction. And today we are reacting to possibly the worst reality dating show I have ever seen in my life. The Courtship was a Regency-themed reality dating show that premiered on NBC in March 2022. It starred Nicole Remy, a modern American woman searching for love in a Jane Austen-inspired setting, complete with suitors, handwritten letters, dinner parties, picnics, and I guess you could call them archery afternoons. It was filmed at the historic Castle Howard in England, the same location used in Bridgerton. The show was meant to target fans of period dramas and dating shows, I think, but really struggled to find an audience.
Stan, you're the big guy. Let's see it. Oh, I'm sad.
When I tell you, this show came out so quickly after Bridgerton aired, like trying to ride the wave, but it felt like it had awful planning and structure, and to be honest, tension and chemistry, which you've got to have in any Regency romance.
I have been waiting to meet you tonight. Are you letting me rub your belly? Can I rub it right now?
Yes.
Like, what is that?
Could use some rubbing.
We need some Tums. Get us some Tums.
It was marketed as The Bachelorette meets Pride and Prejudice, but instead of offering the best of both worlds, it gave us the worst of both of them. So she arrives and she's got this whole mansion to herself, which dream. She is allowed to bring along her modern day court, her mother, father, sister, and best friend, who are positioned as her chaperones and confidants in this romantic experiment. And I'm going to talk about how wild that side of it was in a minute. So the show quickly introduces its central point, which is that Nicole will be choosing from 16 eligible bachelors. Each of them are in cravats and waistcoats, which I think they've all been schooled before they get there that this dating show is all about chivalry and, you know, airs and graces and having the charm of a bygone era. The episode tries to establish stakes and romance through a masquerade ball, a dance lesson, I think, and these awful, like, written letters or poems to her that she reads in front of her parents. There's this one guy that I think he put something like super sensual in the letter. Her parents are sitting right there, and he had to have known that it was going to be filmed and she was going to be reading them out on camera. Have you seen that trend on TikTok where people start playing a very like lewd AI country song in front of like their parents or grandparents, and they're like, this song is the top #1 song right now, and it's got like awful like references in it, and then the parents are like, that's exactly the way her dad looked when she's reading out this letter from one of the suitors. And I'm like, you've been told that this is a Regency era dating show. Like, think Mr. Darcy, like think Bridgerton, why your sisters or mother or ex-girlfriend, whatever, loved shows like this and act that way. And instead, he's like, you know what would make a lot of sense if I put some like sexual stuff in this letter? I was like, okay, this is starting out great. I can see the tone of where this is going. The first episode is just so messy because she's trying to get these guys to like introduce themselves at the ball to her parents in like a genteel, respectable way and like play along. And her parents are so excited to be there and they're like embracing this whole thing. And then a lot of these duds are just giving like nothing in these conversations. It's so awkward.
So they say an apple a day will keep the doctor away.
Oh!
Unless you don't want to keep the doctor away, then we'll just throw it over there.
So this was really awkward because it just felt like that it was these cameras being shoved into teenagers' faces while they're trying to talk at prom. So some of these guys attempt British accents. Some of them play up having British accents. Some of them lean into like cliched suave lines, and pretty much all of them feel like they really want to be on reality TV. I also want to say she looks drop dead gorgeous throughout this entire show. Nothing about this outfit or a lot of the outfits that she wears that really screams like Regency era. It definitely leans into like bold Bridgerton patterns, and I'm not mad about it, but I'm not into it either. The way they've done their outfits, it makes it feel very costumish, like not that they've stepped back in time, but that they're kind of like Regency LARPing. And so I think maybe that part of it was hard for them to take it seriously, and then I think it was hard for us as an audience to take it seriously. The most insane, diabolical part of this show were the balls, which also served as the like rose ceremony, like elimination session. At the end of the episode, Nicole would gather her court, her family and her friend, to discuss the suitors who had impressed or disappointed them that week. So based on those conversations, a handful of men would be selected to appear at what was called the farewell dance, a formal dance meant to mirror the politeness and decorum of a Regency ballroom, apparently. Nicole would have these like brief one-on-one dances with the men she was considering sending home, offering them like a last chance to plead their case, all while literally on top of the string quartet and her family. And then the saved men were up in the balcony watching everything. I've never watched more uncomfortable reality dating moments in my life than these dances.
I just think that if you give me another shot, you're not going to regret it. And if you let me go tonight, you're making a big mistake.
I don't like that at all. I don't know. I don't really like my judgment being questioned,
But it really felt like they didn't plan it out right with the amount of people that would have to be in this room. And in the first episode especially, because it doesn't look so bad, after that they must have looked at the footage and been like, this is terrible. They are dancing on top of her family, and it is so uncomfortable. And then they're asking them, not just to do like a prom style sway together, but like a full on, in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, where they are staring each other down and like twirling around with everyone, and then it just is the two of them together. They're asking them to dance that kind of dance whilst trying to talk, which the reason why we have that scene in Pride and Prejudice and then in other Regency era period dramas is because these people from the time they are children in the gentry class have been taught how to dance and how to talk while they're dancing their whole lives. That is a part of their socialization. That is their scrolling, is to go to these events and dance and be able to talk. And they know a lot of these figured dances from the time that they're really little. Some of them would have gotten like French dance tutors brought in from other countries to teach them and things. And so I just feel bad that they expected these reality show guys to be able to have very serious chats about like staying or going or their feelings about her whilst having to do this dance. Like you could just tell some of these guys were fighting for their lives trying to remember the steps of this dance. And then she's only able to get out 3 words per turn because they're like twirling around each other. And she's like, I need you, twirl, to show me, twirl, you care about me, twirl, and our connection, like twirl, 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 and the you are, twirl, a gentleman. This fantasy about like strong romantic men taking the lead, that sort of thing. Like you're having to watch her beg these men to care about her week after week, and then all the rest of them are watching her do that. Like I don't know who thought up this like setup for this, but it's awful. It's so bad.
I want to apologize if you don't feel like my focus was on you. It is. And I am here for you. If you do decide to give me a second chance, I will promise to you that I will make sure to make time for you. I am here for the real thing.
And he's like, I know what you're saying. I got in my head at the archery lesson. twirl, twirl. I didn't come talk to you, twirl, twirl. I want you to know that I'm a gentleman. Our connection is real. I'm only here for you, twirl, twirl, twirl. The biggest problem with this show is that it leaned into all the aesthetics and activities of Bridgerton without any of the like constraints of the time period. There were dinner parties and Pall Mall and horseback rides and rowing and billiards and archery contests, but no real like rules as to how the courting would go. So it just became like a free-for-all where she could kiss whenever and have guys sleep over for the night and not adhere to like any sort of the etiquette. She'd like go on these picnics randomly unchaperoned, and they'd never give you a reason like why she'd go on the picnics unaccompanied. And then all of a sudden they're like tongues deep, and I'm like, how is it supposed to build tension like in the Regency era? You know, like no judgments, but it just felt like the rules would apply one minute and be thrown out the window the next. There was no way to really build a story around that. Like with Bridgerton, a part of the reasons why it's so exciting to watch like Daphne and the Duke accidentally kiss in the garden and then Anthony to catch them is because it breaks the rules of society, and then there are consequences, which kind of builds tension between the two of them, and it creates a story around them. And when you don't have that, and 1 second your parents have to be watching you on a date and the next they're nowhere to be found, and they don't give you any reasons as to why, you're just like, okay, so she can just go and make out whenever she wants. So what are the stakes in this Regency world that we've been given? Like, what was the point of that? Why can't this just be the Bachelor or any other dating show where you can make out when you feel like it? Like, it just didn't make the structure of the show made no sense. The male leads of this show, no hate to these guys. I'm sure a lot of them are nice in real life, but I did feel as if rather than creating this at least illusion of like chivalric, respectful, well-spoken and dedicated male leads, it's shown a huge light onto like modern dating problems and a lot of, dating guys being flighty and unable to talk through their emotions or something, which is giving also the opposite of like a Regency gentleman once they've declared their love type thing. In Bridgerton, we can recognize the tropes we're drawn to. Simon is the Darcy figure, restrained and distant but passionate. Anthony is the rakish older brother with a secret soft side and extremely dutiful. Benedict the artist channels the misunderstood dreamer trope. The Courtship gives us no clear archetypes. The men weren't charming rogues or sensitive heroes or witty best friends. There was no like Darcy to root for, no Knightley to fall for, no one who stood out as Nicole's equal or opposite really. Just a series of like forgettable men in waistcoats, none of whom seemed particularly interested in actually immersing themselves in this world, more that they were dropped there and they have to stumble through it and like enjoy being on camera. You can tell a majority of these guys have absolutely no idea what the Regency era is, or like Jane Austen, or even Bridgerton, and their only context is like Cinderella and Disney princesses, so they don't even have the tools to commit to the time period because they've got no clue really what it is. So much of Austen is built on clever dialogue and unspoken moments. People used indirect speech and innuendo and subtext rather than open flirtation, which is what builds that juicy tension. There was no like witty verbal sparring in this show. If there were disagreements, it was just like catty arguments between the guys, which also is not attractive. What makes a film like Austenland work, despite its knowingly cheesy, over-the-top, historically inaccurate setting, which aesthetically is pretty similar to this reality show, is that it understands and respects the emotional truth of why people are drawn to Regency romances in the first place. The premise is simple but clever. A modern woman obsessed with Pride and Prejudice goes to a Jane Austen-themed retreat to live out her romantic fantasies and ends up falling for someone who loves the world as much as she does. The love interest, played by J.J. Field, isn't just acting the part of a Mr. Darcy type. He genuinely enjoys the fantasy, respects Austen's world, and never sees the women there as silly or desperate for wanting romance. That sincerity is what makes the story work. In contrast, the Courtship often felt like the men weren't that into the whole Regency setup at all. They weren't buying into the fantasy, and some didn't even seem to understand it. Some even looked visibly uncomfortable in the setting and the suits. So fantasy never really took off. Without that well-crafted edit, it was just a bunch of men like thrown in a room with waistcoats on, clearly more interested in being on a TV show than being in love. And then what ended up happening is that they had to craft fake storylines that clearly were producer planted, in my opinion, allegedly. It really felt like these men knew exactly what storylines that they were trying to evoke, like they had been coached very well in order to be a part of some of the storylines that were clearly planted, and I've never seen it so bad as in the show. There was this other storyline involving the best friend, which felt really overly manufactured, but where one of the suitors was into the friend and like secretly trying to get with her best friend instead, which potentially could have been scandalous enough to keep people watching, but he just kind of like hovered in the background awkwardly, made a few comments to her like while Nicole's sister was there, and then was sent home. The friend did not seem that mad about it either, which also was like, are you serious? Then there was a moment when one of the men actually spent the night in Nicole's room, like randomly, which could have been a bombshell if the show was actually serious about its so-called, Regency framework. They bring her family there to act as if they're chaperones, which they never actually did. They were just kind of around. And then he spends the night in her room and nothing happens from it. I mean, we're meant to believe these are old-fashioned, courtship rituals, suitors writing letters and dancing in ballrooms and having chaperone walks, and then suddenly we're throwing all that out the window for a sleepover that nobody cared about, which is why this show is always in a rock and a hard place, because in this day and age, your reputation is not going to be ruined for something like that. They've got the fantasy suites in The Bachelor, but if you're gonna go with a Regency theme, you've got to lean into the social structures of the time. It felt more like a half-hearted attempt to spice things up because there was nothing else going on than, having an actual moment with any real emotional or narrative weight. Like, it would have been way more exciting if it was like these guys pining after her, and then she could only kiss them after like one guy won one of the tournaments or something, which feels super like purity culture to me. So like the show just doesn't work for modern times, but like maybe for these guys to be like, I wish I could kiss you so badly right now, but then they're not allowed, or like after their dates go back to the other guys and be like, I don't know how to process like how she makes me feel, but her not being able to know that or talk about it directly with these guys, it would have built some sort of tension maybe. So for her to just be able to like freely talk about anything from the very beginning, we're just watching modern people date with costumes on. And so, in a lot of ways you don't really want that in real life. You don't want people to be coy with one another. Like that would waste time on a reality dating show. But when we're talking the Regency era, you want to be able to have that tension because these people need to be mysterious to each other, at least for a little while, and for the rules of society to be dictating that in some way. And the fact that they didn't follow this in any way just made it feel like these people were like cosplaying even more. Now, Nicole was a likable, really charismatic lead who I feel like could master a smolder. Like she was so good at flirting. There's like a certain type of guy that when you look him in the eye, you're just like, oh, like the really attractive type of guys that make you feel like you're the only person in the room. And there's a lot of actors that people say that about. They're like, he just makes anybody feel special and has a ton of charisma. She's the female version of that. She was able to look at these guys in a way that I just feel a lot of them like melted. And so no wonder at the elimination ceremonies, when she would be telling them that they had to go, that there would be like tears streaming down their eyes, because I think the way she looks at some of them, they must have thought like, we've got something, right? Like we've got a connection. And then she's like, I just twirl, twirl, feel like twirl, twirl. You are twirl, twirl, not here. Twirl, twirl for the right reasons. And for that, I have to tell you goodbye. And like, they're just looking at her blankly like, what do you mean? Like, you've looked at me in my soul as if we're soulmates. It's just another day filming for her or something. But yeah, she's got such a look of like seduction. And I wish I could learn a thing or two because I do not. The Courtship's biggest conceptual flaws was that it was stuck between two irreconcilable goals, giving its lead, Nicole, the full romantic agency of a modern woman, while also trying to immerse her and the audience in the high-stakes emotional world of Regency romance. The problem is that those classic Austen tropes, the ones that Bridgerton leans on so effectively, the yearning glances across crowded rooms, love declared too late, the unbearable tension of a brush of the hand, they're all born of a society that deeply limited women's autonomy and relied on classism. So women in the Regency period had very little social mobility, and they couldn't inherit property and were often dependent on marriage for financial and social survival. So a lot of the ways that they would act and they were taught about social airs and graces was performative and would also have to do with survival sometimes as much as it had to do with love. So there's kind of that icky feeling behind that when you're like, okay, well, we're going to just transport these people back in time, but we're going to ignore any of the way that this was propped up in a very, specific manner for women and how that left them at a disadvantage and meant that maybe they had to flirt with men that they didn't want to, or have the attention of multiple men and like drum up interest in themselves and court multiple different men in order to get the right situation. Not necessarily the person that they loved, but the exact right suitor so that she would have the best possible marriage for, her family and her future. So it just adds this kind of like weird layer to it that they never talk about on this show, but that they sometimes take seriously and sometimes don't in terms of like trying to keep everything proper. And they don't explain why, why would that be? And if something happened to a woman where she was caught in a scandal, what that would mean for her long term. And so I just feel like there's a lot of context missing to this, and there's just a lot of mixed matched motives to how they want her to operate. Because on the one hand, they're like, you're a modern like woman out in the world who got her degrees and your family is very educated. And I loved that fact about her family. You could tell that they were all like really go-getters and that they're really supportive of her and her decisions and like doing this experiment. But also her having to behave in this Regency way sometimes and then not keeping those rules other times. It's just super confusing for the audience, and I couldn't get behind it the entire time. And I feel that that's one of the main huge reasons why this show flopped so bad. Of course she should want to have agency, and we as an audience should want that for her. But in this show's premise, giving her full modern control while still trying to evoke the emotional weight of a time when women didn't have control made the whole thing feel like very tonally confused. There were no real obstacles, no social risks, no consequences. And so the relationships lacked depth and urgency, or even like the thrill of rebellion, or like potentially being able to get with someone outside of your class. In real Regency society, young women were strictly chaperoned. Public flirtation, physical affection, or even unguarded private time could completely ruin a woman's reputation. Courtship was a careful, often silent negotiation between families, full of rules and unspoken tensions. In Bridgerton, even the more fantastical elements acknowledge this structure, and the women have to operate within that structure. When Daphne is caught alone with Simon, they're forced to marry or duel. The consequences of a moment alone are that serious. Well, the duel's a bit much, but you know what I mean. One of the strangest things about the courtship was how modern the language was. You've got these contestants dressed in like full Regency era outfits, waistcoats, cravats, the whole like Bridgerton fantasy. And then they're casually dropping like 21st century slang like they just walked off the set of The Bachelor. There was no like real attempt to stylize the way they spoke. No period phrasing, not really any sense of formality that would have made it more immersive. And to be fair, that would have been like way too much to ask. Most of these men clearly had no background in Austen, no sense of the time period, and likely no acting experience.
From NYC. I'll tell you what I'm looking for in the girl that I adore. Don't want to sound like a buster.
Buster, because I know my rhymes are whack. Oh, Lord.
Oh, it's like a rap.
Oh.
You gotta rap this.
Give me a beat
Okay,
test. don't want to sound like a buster because I know my rhymes are whack. But I promise you one thing, I'll always keep it on the plaque. It's wiggity wiggity what?
Asking them to suddenly speak in a stylized, period dialogue would have probably gone sideways fast, but maybe it would have been entertaining to watch them try, like I feel like it would have been nice to see some of them attempt it. There was one or two that were trying to be way more like genteel with her parents, especially with the first ball when they meet up with them, and a couple of them when they would take her parents aside and try and talk to them, tried to be a bit proper in the way they spoke, but none of them could really pull it off, so you can see why the producers didn't push for that. But because they did enforce some of the like surface level etiquette, like using Mr. or Miss, bowing or writing letters, and it ended up making the whole thing like so much more awkward. You get these weird like tonal shifts where someone would bow with total sincerity and then say something like, she's just really vibing with other dudes right now. And so just it would feel really like jarring. Or like they would bow at a dinner party and then one of the guys, kind of like they do in The Bachelor, would show up unannounced and want to speak to her. But then he's like got to come in and bow formally to the group before he then just does exactly what they would do on another dating show, which is like, I want to take her aside. So yeah, it was just a bit much. There was not a moment of this show that I thought that anyone, including the lead, and maybe I'm being judgmental here, but none of these people, I was convinced for a moment of this, were ready to get married. It was hard for me to take this show seriously for 1 second. Honestly, the most redeeming part of the courtship was Nicole's family. They were genuinely like lovely, smart, thoughtful, emotionally grounded people who clearly adore her and have raised a confident, like articulate woman. Unlike most reality dating shows where contestants are totally cut off from their loved ones. So in the Bachelor Mansion, it's basically like a friendless vacuum. And Love Island, might as well be on another planet. You enter with strangers and you leave with strangers. But I actually found it really nice that her family and friends were there to support her. The courtship actually brought her whole family along for the ride, and I think that worked. Her parents, her sister, and even her best friend, they were all there in Regency dress, sipping tea and giving advice, and it did add to the warmth and depth to the show that so many dating series lack. You could tell they weren't there just for the drama. Like, this was the only part that really felt authentic to me. They really wanted Nicole to find someone who deserved her. Watching them react to the suitors and ask, insightful questions and support her decisions made it all feel a bit more grounded, even when the rest of the show was just chaotic. All in all, the reason this show flopped so hard is that it didn't pick a lane. It wasn't fun and messy like Love Island, and it wasn't emotionally satisfying like The Bachelorette can be sometimes, and it definitely wasn't smart or like slow burning like Bridgerton or Austen. They didn't actually lean into the time period because that would have been problematic, but they also attempted to take it seriously sometimes, which made it all the more ridiculous. The production was too tame for reality TV fans, I think, and not historically rich enough for period drama lovers. Viewers who came for Bridgerton-style fantasy expected more immersion in Regency customs, not just like cosplay aesthetics. Then reality dating show audiences and then any romance readers expects there to be character archetypes, relationship tropes and happily ever afters, which the best, produced reality TV shows do super well, which is why people will watch hours and hours of it, because there is some sort of structured story unfolding, even if it's actually franken-bitten together. Maybe if they'd have made this more of like we're making it as if Nicole has been plopped down inside of a light, cozy, Regency romance novel, rather than like leaning into anything Jane Austen related or any mentions of real Regency society, which would have been a whole can of worms for a Black woman in the time. Something they don't address at all, which is like barriers to race in this show whatsoever. If we were to reimagine how this could have been made more entertaining, like maybe not right to make, but more entertaining and immersive. If they'd fully committed to the ensemble format, but forced them to be in the Regency era. So imagine if it hadn't have been just like Nicole with 16 suitors, but a whole group of men and women living together in this Regency styled house. Suddenly you could have room for rivalries and shifting alliances and slow burn romances and, all under the very strict, social codes of the time. So think Love Island meets Jane Austen, where every dance has to be requested through a chaperone, and private conversations are scandalous, and the smallest gesture, a brush of the hand, a letter passed under a table can change the game. If they leaned into the rules rather than bending them or ignoring them, the stakes would have been so much higher. I just don't know how they would have done that, which is probably why they came up with the structure that they did, which didn't end up working. But I don't know what the answer is. I just think that the ensemble idea would have gone over so much better, especially since they were actually filming at a castle with all the sprawling land and stuff. It would have been really cool to just kind of Love Island it, where they've got the lay of the land type thing. I don't know what the answer is. Probably just that this show shouldn't have been made, but that would be my idea for making it a bit better. I won't spoil who she picks from the courtship in case you'd like to watch this train wreck for yourself, but it very much felt like she singled in one particular guy who the producers did not give a good edit, so it wasn't even like you could at least lean into that and root for them. I wasn't a fan of his from the get-go, and they did not give him a good edit pretty much throughout. So shockingly, the show did not get picked up for further seasons. It was pulled from NBC to USA Network just 2 episodes in, so clearly it did not do well. What this proves is that even in the reality space, storytelling is key to reaching audiences. It's so important. It didn't matter how visually lush this show was. It was narratively shallow, and viewers couldn't buy into it because it just wasn't a world that was fully built. I did do kind of a deep dive into a couple of these contestants' lives, and let's just say that for some of them, this is not the only dating show that they ended up on, so shocker. Well, that is it for me, guys. Have you seen The Courtship? What do you think of it? Would you watch another historical romance show? Jordan and I were actually approached to be extras in The Courtship. We got an email from the producers asking if we would be interested in dressing up in Regency garb, but we had to provide our own outfits, and Jordan didn't have anything at that time, so I kind of ghosted them. But I wish that I hadn't, just because we could have had a front row experience to what the show was actually like and behind the scenes. Not that I probably would have been able to talk about it, but I wish we would have. Plus, I think we were not thin enough, if you catch my drift, to be extras in the show, but I still kind of wish we would have done something like that because I'm nosy and I love drama, just not my own.